Number 5. Joseph Mengele. I'm just gonna get this out of the way now. This man is the only entry from the Second World War on today's list. And that's mainly because, well, like I said before, online guidelines make it practically impossible for me to talk about the evil German dictator or members of his party. Also known as the Angel of Death, Dr. Mengele was an anthropologist and SS physician who conducted numerous inhumane medical experiments on the prisoners in Auschwitz. He was born on March 16th in 1911 in the Bavarian city of places I cannot pronounce, Germany, and was the eldest son of Karl Mengele, a manufacturer of farming equipment. Joseph studied medicine and physical anthropology at several universities. In 1935, he earned a PhD in physical anthropology from the University of Munich, and in 1936 he passed the state medical exams. In 1937, he began working at the Institute for Hereditary Biology and Racial Hygiene in Frankfurt, Germany. There he was an assistant to the director, Dr. Ottmar von Verschuer, a leading geneticist known for his research on twins. So under that doctor's direction, Joseph completed an additional doctorate in 1938. He was particularly interested in twins, as twin research was seen at the time to be the ideal way to determine how the environment or human heredity influenced the human body. At Auschwitz, he was one of a number of medical professionals who selected victims to be sentenced to the gas chambers, or to be spared for his experimental research. He would attempt red fluid transfusions from one twin to the other, do amputations and try and sew it onto the other twin, stitch two twins together to form Siamese twins, infect one twin with typhus or another disease, and way too many other experiments. To the surprise of no one, more often than not the twins died during the procedures, or he would have them killed afterwards just so he could do an autopsy for funsies. If one twin died from a disease, he would often kill the other as well to mark the differences between the sick and healthy subjects. The evil doctor was also very interested in heterochromia, where people have irises of different colors, and he would collect eyes and body parts of his victims and send it through for research. He would inject chemicals in victims' eyes to attempt to change their eye color. Nowadays, we just use contacts. I have a whole collection. He also experimented on pregnant women before sending them off to the gas chambers and caused incestuous pregnancies, always under the guise of research. He tried sex change operations, removing organs, and operating on victims without anesthesia. And if all that wasn't wild enough, he tried to prove that Jewish and Romani people were genetically inferior through his morbid experimentation. Throughout his time at Auschwitz, Joseph sent his colleagues in Germany red fluids, body parts, organs, skeletons, and fetuses that had been taken from prisoners. He managed to escape imprisonment after war, first by working as a farm stableman in Bavaria, then by moving to South America. He later moved to Brazil, where he met up with another former Yahtzee party member, Wolfgang Gerhard. In 1985, a multinational team of forensic experts traveled to Brazil in search of Joseph. They determined that a man named Gerhard had died of a stroke while swimming in 1979, and dental records later revealed that Joseph had, at some point, assumed Wolfgang's identity and was the stroke victim. Number 4. Paul Bernardo. Okay, I'm cheating a little bit on this one, since I'll be covering both Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. If you don't believe that she's just as twisted, if not more so than he is, wait till the end of this and see if I can't change your mind, because my stomach is already turning. If a lawyer is willing to be disbarred by revealing what was told to him in confidence, that's pretty telling in my book. So Paul Kenneth Bernardo is a Canadian serial killer and more, who was dubbed the Skullgirl Killer and other monikers I can't say thanks to the interwebs hating the R word, and together with his former wife, Karla Homolka, one half of the Ken and Barbie killers. So Paul was born in Scarborough, Ontario on August 27th of 1964, the third and youngest of Kenneth Walter Bernardo and Marilyn Elizabeth Bernardo. So Kenneth Sr. often sexually took advantage of Paul's older sister Deborah in front of other family members, and would eventually be charged with crimes involving voyeurism and P-word crimes. If you need elaboration on any of the words I can't say today, I assure you someone in the comments can help. Marilyn Bernardo often withdrew from her family due to depression and agoraphobia, eventually moving into the basement. Paul presented himself being, a happy and well-adjusted youth, despite his family's dysfunction, and was an active member of the Boy Scouts. Beneath the charming facade, however, he gradually developed pyromaniac inclinations and dark sexual fantasies, one of which involved creating a virgin farm where he would breed virgins to take advantage of sexually. And here I thought I dodged a bullet when it came to my ex that had people-munching fantasies and was way too into My Little Pony. Later in life, Paul was diagnosed with sexual sadism, voyeurism, narcissistic personality disorder, and met the requirement for a diagnosis of psychopathy. So, that checks. After a fight between his parents when he was in high school, Paul was informed by his mother that he was the result of an extramarital affair and that Kenneth was not his biological father. Repulsed by all of this, Paul began to call his mother a salute, and she reciprocated by calling him him a bastard from hell. Later, after growing weary of Bernardo's domineering behavior, his first girlfriend left him for one of his friends, and in retaliation he set fire to all of her belongings that he could find. Between 1987 and 1990, Bernardo committed increasingly vicious sexual crimes in and around Scarborough, attacking most of his victims after stalking them as they got off buses late in the evening. Oh yeah, I totally feel safe right now. From May to September of 1990, Toronto police submitted more than 130 suspect samples for DNA testing and received 2 tips pointing to Bernardo. So they interviewed him on November 20th for 35 minutes, and he voluntarily provided DNA samples for testing, but was not arrested at this time for any of those crimes. During this time frame, he met and got engaged to Carla Homolka, and that's when things escalated from sexual crimes to killings. While there are 3 notable killings, I'm just gonna talk about the one that disturbs me the most for time purposes. So although he was engaged to Carla, Paul had become obsessed with her younger sister Tammy, peering into her window and entering her room to get himself off while she slept. Carla helped Bernardo by breaking the windows in her sister's room, allowing him access. According to Paul's testimony at trial, Carla laced spaghetti sauce with crushed Valium she had stolen from her employer in an animal clinic. She served it to her sister, who soon lost consciousness, and Bernardo then did icky things to Tammy while Carla watched. After a minute, Tammy regained consciousness, and it only gets worse from here. 6 months before their 1991 wedding, Carla stole the sleeping pills from the clinic, and on December 23rd of 1990, Carla and Paul administered said pills to Tammy in a rum and eggnog cocktail. When Tammy lost consciousness, Carla and Paul undressed her, and Carla applied a halothane-soaked cloth to her sister's nose and mouth. Carla wanted to give Tammy's virginity to Paul for Christmas, since according to her, Paul was disappointed that he was not Carla's first sexual partner, and the duo also had a video camera on hand for the experience. You can't make stuff like this up. Tammy began to vomit. They tried to revive her and called 911 after hiding evidence, dressing Tammy and moving her into her bedroom, but she never woke up. Despite being observed vacuuming and washing laundry in the middle of the night and, evidence of a chemical burn on Tammy's face, the regional municipality of Niagara coroner and Carla's family accepted the couple's version of events, that Tammy had just choked on her vomit after consumption of alcohol. After Tammy's death, Paul and Carla videotaped themselves engaging in sexual intercourse, with Carla wearing Tammy's clothing and pretending to be her. Thankfully, now Paul is in jail for the rest of his life, but Carla is out in public, living alone in Salaberry de Valleyfield.
Number 3. D.B. Cooper. Now our next entry, I would hesitate to call him as evil as the rest of some of these crooks, Sure, he hijacked a plane, sure he held the entire plane hostage, and sure he stole $200,000 from the government, but that doesn't mean he's a bad guy. D.B. Cooper's case is one of contemporary crime legends, as all that I just described sounds like he would be FBI public enemy number 1, right? Like they'd be working around the clock to bust this guy, they'd have him within the week. He slipped through authorities' fingers, and to date, D.B. Cooper was never caught. We don't know if that was even his real name or just an epithet he was using for the plane. We don't know anything really too concrete about him. Depending on what your definition of success is, D.B. Cooper could possibly be considered one of the most successful criminals of all time. To get into the nitty-gritty of the details, on November 24th, 1971, a man using the possible alias Dan Cooper boarded a flight to Seattle, and almost as soon as it took off, he passed a note to a flight attendant indicating that he had a with him, and that he demanded that when the plane landed, he trade the passengers on the flight for $200,000 and 2 parachutes. That's a smart man. He didn't want to waste any of that money on parachutes. The note said that if anything funny happened, he would blow the plane up. They complied out of fear, and upon landing, he was given the money by local authorities. Cooper then seized the plane one more time, holding the flight crew hostage with plans to fly to Mexico City. But midway through the flight, Cooper pulled a little point break and jumped out of the plane with all the money with him. And that would be the last time anyone would have ever seen D.B. Cooper. The FBI chased him for years to no avail. Nothing was ever found. No body ever recovered. No suspect ever caught out of a laundry list of people of interest. Some of the bills were recovered, but that's the only piece of evidence. Now, my absolute favorite theory about D.B. Cooper, and it's kinda out there, is that he's legendary cinema director Tommy Wiseau, and that this is where his fortune came from, as the man is shrouded in mystery regarding where his seemingly limitless supply of money comes from and his mysterious origins. Is it completely ridiculous and has no basis in reality? Yes, but it's also hilarious. Now, as for any more likely suspects for Cooper, there were a couple of Special Forces veterans who lined up with physical descriptions who could have been capable of committing the heist, but no concrete charges were ever made, and to date, no trace was ever found. Number 2, the Zodiac. Possibly one of the most infamous cases in American history, the Zodiac was a notorious criminal, famed in equal measures for his slayings and for his chilling obsession and interaction with the police trying to track him. He was made a household name after a Hollywood flick starring Jake Gyllenhaal and Robert Downey Jr. depicting the efforts trying to find him. The Zodiac is known to be responsible for 5 different deaths terrorizing California in the late 60s and early 70s, although he himself claims responsibility for for 37 victims. The Zodiac case became legend when he sent his now infamous letters to 3 separate newspapers, providing details only he could have known about the crimes, and challenging the police to a sick game of sorts, sending them incomprehensible ciphers and riddles that supposedly contain clues to his identity and the crimes within. Only one of his ciphers was ever solved, and the rest remain a mystery. The Riddler from the new Batman movie is a direct inspiration from the Zodiac's sinister dealings. For 5 years, the Zodiac would taunt his pursuers with riddles and codes, sending horrifying cards, taunts, a letter boldly displaying "My name is blank," and then a cipher below it teasing their inability to find him, a postcard with his symbol written in blood, amongst others. Part of what makes the Zodiac such a fascinating and truly horrifying case is how much he seems like a movie bad guy come to life. The planning makes him out to be some sort of sinister criminal mastermind, and it's hard to disagree with that proclamation when he's completely eluded any form of capture for the better part of 50 years. There were several possible suspects as to who the Zodiac could have been, but nothing conclusive. To date, people are still trying to find the answer, hoping something new might come up to put that nightmare to rest. And number 1, Jack the Ripper. If you want to talk about evil that's got some staying power, it's hard to top Whitechapel's most infamous resident ever, 134 years avoiding capture, which means he could still be out there. The 18th century Night Stalker has held an almost supernatural-like grip over public interest since we first ever heard about the case, surrounding the brutal 5 slayings we know about, who knows how many more. Preying on women and using the cover of the night, Jack eluded, stupefied, and taunted the streets of London, leaving a disgusting trail of blood and gore in his wake, leaving victims looking like the aftermath of a butcher's. He seemed to take a sickening glee in his violent delights, mocking his would-be pursuers, sending the police threatening letters and even organs from his crimes. Jack is an almost modern mythical boogeyman, appearing across hundreds upon hundreds of works of fiction, TV shows, movies, video games, you name it. Assassin's Creed even tried to say he was part of the Order. That's a little out there. There are some folk who offer that Jack the Ripper is the progenitor to all true crime fascination, which honestly kinda makes sense. As much as he terrified Londoners at the time, the media was obsessed with him, with the original media buzz surrounding him, paralleling how we talk about most brutal crimes these days. You can bet your bottom pounds that if Jack was terrorizing London today, there'd be podcasters talking about him in between sponsored ads for MeUndies. Jack's crimes shocked Londoners, as the vicious and public nature of the slayings were not exactly commonplace. So surely, in 130 years, someone had to have some idea as to who Mr. the Ripper was, right? Well, with a case as famous as this, obviously there are some options. A quick glance at Jack's Wikipedia page suggests a possible 31 different suspects over the years who've all been attributed to it, and those are just the ones who made the page. It's worth noting that we are still looking, we are still trying to find him, put this case to rest, because everyone wants to be the one to say they unmasked the Ripper.
Number 5 on this list is Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong wanted China to become a superpower, but how he went about it wasn't the best. Loss of life to Mao Zedong really wasn't of much importance to him as long as the end goal was achieved. The BBC writes, Mao and other communist leaders set out to reshape Chinese society. Industry came under state ownership and China's farmers began to be organized into collectives. All opposition was ruthlessly suppressed. The Chinese initially received significant help from the Soviet Union, but relations soon began to cool. In 1958, in an attempt to introduce a more Chinese form of communism, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward. This aimed at mass mobilization of labor to improve agricultural and industrial production. The result instead was a massive decline in agricultural output, which together with poor harvests led to famine and the death of millions. The policy was abandoned and Mao's position weakened. In an attempt to reassert his authority, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution in 1966, aiming to purge the country of impure elements and revive the revolutionary spirit. 1.5 million people died and much of the country's cultural heritage was destroyed. In September 1967, with many cities on the verge of anarchy, Mao sent in the army to restore order. It was in this great leap forward that Mao's rule cost the lives of millions. He wanted to change China into an industrialized nation and implemented tons of unproven agricultural methods. This dropped the food output significantly and led to the Great Chinese Famine. This famine is largely regarded as the deadliest man-made disaster in human history, so yeah, it was pretty bad. Unlike others on this list, Mao for the most part wasn't infatuated with the deaths of citizens, it was just a byproduct of his incompetency and horrible rule. Granted, we can't let him off too easily because he also didn't care that much to change his way of thinking. During his reign of power, it's estimated that 40 to 70 million Chinese civilians died through forced labor, executions, or famine. Number 4 on this list is Nero. We're throwing it way back with this one and going to the year 37 AD. That's when Nero was born and he lived until 68 AD. Only just over 30 years of life, but he did enough during that time to earn himself a spot on this list. Wikipedia writes, most Roman sources offer overwhelmingly negative assessments of his personality and reign. The historian Tacitus claims the Roman people thought him compulsive and corrupt. Suetonius tells that many Romans believed that the Great Fire of Rome was instigated by Nero to clear land for his planned Golden House. Tacitus claims that Nero seized Christians as scapegoats for the fire and had them burned alive, seemingly motivated not by public justice but by personal cruelty. This personal cruelty of his is widely documented and nobody was safe from it. One would think that your own mother would be on the do not kill list, but apparently not for Nero. To rid himself of any potential outside influences, he had his own mother murdered. He's said to have stabbed, burned, boiled, impaled people for his own personal pleasure. Couple this with the fact that he's said to have burned down entire cities while people are still inside of them, and you get a horrible tyrannical dictator who, I'm sad to report, actually did exist.
Number 3. No, I'm Spartacus. Actually, much more evil than him. Heinrich Müller. Born in Munich, Germany, April 1900. After serving as a pilot in World War I, he joined the police in Munich, soon acquiring a reputation as a skilled investigator. As such, he would draw the attention of 2 nastier men, Heinrich H. and Reinhard H., leaders of the German SS army. Yeah, I don't even like saying their full names out loud. Just Google them up, you'll know. Müller entered the SS in 1934 and quickly rose through the ranks of the organization as a police official. In 1939, when the Gestapo police force and the other organizations joined the Reich, Müller was made head honcho. Yeah, basically this guy was like next in charge to you know who. He was a pretty scary and powerful guy. Müller was involved in a ton of criminal affairs. He helped plan the Polish attack, he signed the bullet order, he authorized the torture of officers who had conspired to kill other SS soldiers. People knew him and knew of him. He was, unfortunately, infamous and a huge deal. This is the weird part. When the Allies moved in and they arrested him, the man turned out to be another Müller. Okay. In fact, they couldn't find the Heinrich Müller, instead arresting many others of the same name. The head of the Gestapo wanted for crimes against humanity had vanished without even a trace. Gone. Even the CIA were like, okay, where the hell did this guy just go? He was just right here. He apparently vanished in the last days of the war. The Western Secret Services started many investigations over the years, but Müller and the vast majority of the Gestapo secret files were never found. In 2001, the CIA reopened its archives about the SS war criminal and revealed it still knew nothing new or conclusive about the SS Heinrich Müller who had been in charge all those years ago. Where did this guy vanish to? I don't know. Number 2, us. Sure, I've had my fair share of sibling rivalry. One's better at this, one's better at that. But these siblings took it to a whole other realm. The Han twins, or as I like to call it, the story of good versus evil. A tale as old as time. Well, not that long ago, actually. During the 90s, this was a huge case plastered on every screen of the attempted murder of Sunny Han by her identical twin sister, Gina Han. Whoa. It's November 6, 1996 in California. It quickly became a jaw-dropping case in the media as the case touched on themes of broken families, sister rivalry, split personas, and of course, parallel universes. The sisters had always had disagreements, but apparently hatred became obsession. Throwing some hands here and there became stalking, and eventually jail time. The older they got, the more things escalated. Gina, after escaping prison, had drummed up the idea to hire 2 teenagers to kidnap her sister. Uh-oh. During the kidnapping, the plan, however, failed, and the 2 men were quickly taken into custody by police. Just before going to Sunny's apartment, they went to buy large garbage bags, duct tape, wine, gloves, Pine Sol cleaner, and magazines. Yeah. The police were notified and luckily reached them before Sunny's evil plan could commence. And it was a close one. They, including the evil sister, were locked and loaded. Literally. Scary. Yeah, as in she literally dodged a bullet on that one. This is like the Metal Mario version of yourself, isn't it? This is terrifying. Do you even think you could take an evil version of yourself? It's sad that it's family, you know? The jury reached their verdict as to each defendant on November 20th, 1997, and Han was convicted of all charges, which were 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, 2 counts of burglary, 2 counts of false imprisonment, and 1 count of possession of a weapon. So why did she hate her sister so much? How come she wanted to take over her life and just live one? This has evil parallel universe written all over it, dude. And number 1, the gods. Peru contains its fair share of ancient megalithic ruins. I'll do it again, sorry. Peru contains its fair share of ancient megalithic ruins. If you're not familiar with the construction and myths behind the Machu Picchu and the Nazca lines, then this next one may make you scratch your head. Some would say those are cute compared to this next rock? I don't know. The door in Hayumarca, some think it's a wall, but most believe it becomes a portal to the beyond. The story of the Gate of the Gods, also known as Door of Hayumarca, begins near the banks of the Titicaca over half a millennium ago. According to Incan legend, the universe began here, and according to researchers, the Incan Empire fell here, somewhere around 1592. Peruvians tell the tale of an Incan priest who barely escaped slaughter from the conquistador forces. His name was Aramu Muru, and he was a powerful high priest who served in the Temple of the Seven Rays. To escape his imminent death at the hands of the Spanish army, Muru fled to Hayumarca with the help of other priests, and using a golden disc key, Muru opened the small door in the face of the rock, apparently venturing into another realm. According to legend, the stone door transformed into a bright tunnel that was lit with an unearthly blue light. Aramu Muru passed through the barrier and entered the void, upon which the door then closed behind him. Spooky. Many people believe that he is now living in the land of the gods. Many still believe he is to return with the knowledge of the other side. I mean, if this guy just like platform 9 3/4 himself through a perfectly sanded rock face, yeah, I'm gonna say it's ancient aliens. Right away, 100%. This site's also been said to be aligned by 5 other archaeological sites, which together form an imaginary cross with straight lines crossing each other exactly at the point where this plateau and lake are located. That makes it even creepier. Coming in at number 5, Thomas Midgley Jr. This man is somewhat to blame for the absolute ludicrous gas prices right now. You'd be absolutely amazed what 50 bucks can get you, all about 9 feet. But this man isn't in charge of inflation, no. This man is the man who invented leaded gasoline. Invented in the early 1920s, chemist Thomas Midgley Jr. was working on some pretty cutting-edge chemistry. His task was to conjure a way to enhance automotive gasoline to reduce or eliminate the problem of engine knocking. TEL, or better known as tetrathiolide, was an additive mixed with gasoline to do exactly that. And on December 9th, Tommy here unwillingly and unknowingly created what is to be the most destructive, biodangerous chemical compound, slowly and efficiently destroying our atmosphere. Long story short, this guy created the world's worst pollutant known to us so far, lead. Lead is a naturally occurring metal found in Earth's crust. Its widespread use has resulted in aggressive human environmental contamination. Companies GM and Standard Oil formed the Ethel Corporation shortly hereafter to produce TEL. The company's name was carefully chosen to avoid the use of the word lead. Yeah, don't just take it right out. right out. Of course, shortly after its production, workers began suffering what would become lead poisoning, which resulting, not long after it opened, workers at the Ethel plant began suffering from poisoning, which in 1922, the US Public Health Service warned of the dangers of lead production and leaded fuel. However, the phase out of leaded gasoline wasn't officially banned until about 1996, and even in some places, the early 2000s. It is estimated that 7 million tons of lead were released into the atmosphere from gasoline in the United States alone, and due to its popularity and production rate since the 1920s, it has been estimated by scientists that its result on the Earth accounted for about 900,000 deaths and about 22 million years of healthy life lost. I am not making a bold statement here and saying that this man shouldn't have been born. Maybe he could have been like a pilot or something, or a dentist. I don't know. Number 4, Gottlieb Kirchhoff. If you're anything like me and are addicted to the sweeter side of life, well then this one's for you. Seems like our boys here have something in common, but trying to find a solution actually led to creating something way worse. Gottlieb Kirchhoff was a German-Russian chemist who, through the use of his pharmacy, accidentally invented one of the world's worst things for you. The bittersweet part is that it's sugar. Well, high fructose sugar actually. Basically the thing that makes everything taste good. From sody pop to candy. Fructose or high fructose corn syrup is made by diluting cornstarch with hydrochloric acid? Excuse me, can I have the hydrochloric acid on the side? I actually just got a root canal. Yeah, thank you. But the bittersweet part comes from the effects. See, this guy had no idea the impact of his tasty formula would have on the body. Basically, this stuff is in everything we eat and drink. To give you some numbers, kills about 1 million people a year. And I'm lowballing. Messes up our body, regulates our energy levels, and is responsible for the diabetes crisis and one of the leading causes of death from disease for humans. That's not so sweet. Next time you eat or drink anything, just look at the label. See what's in it. This guy thought he was doing us all a favor, making things tastier, making things deadlier, dude. I tried to mix this list up a bit instead of repeating main players we know who've created or been responsible for all the atrocities, and I chose Kirchhoff to be on this list for the impact that he would have on the future. I'm looking at the long game here. And if this guy wasn't born, then we probably could have avoided this breakthrough chemical discovery. And unless I'm Kyle Reese from the Terminator, we'll never know.
Number 3 on this list is Pol Pot. Wikipedia writes, Pol Pot was a Cambodian revolutionary and politician who governed Cambodia as Prime Minister of Democratic Kampuchea between 1976 and 1979. Ideologically a Marxist-Leninist and a Khmer nationalist, he was a leading member of Cambodia's communist movement, the Khmer Rouge, from 1963 until 1997 and served as the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Kampuchea from 1963 to 1981. Under his administration, Cambodia was converted into a one-party communist state and went through the events of the Cambodian genocide. The Cambodian genocide is something that we don't learn about enough in history class. This genocide claimed the lives of at least 1.5 million Cambodian civilians from 1975 to 1979. 1.5 million is already a ridiculously large number, but it should also be noted that in 1975, this would have accounted for roughly a quarter of the entire country. Pol Pot and the party that he led during this time wanted to turn Cambodia into an agrarian socialist republic. At the time, Mao Zedong was in charge of China and Pol Pot went to him for advice on how to make this a reality. To do this, he emptied out cities and forced people into labor camps where they were either executed or simply worked to death. Disease and malnutrition was also rampant in these camps and the quality of life was horrible. Money was abolished and everybody was forced to wear the exact same black clothing, stripping people of any sense of their individuality. This truly was a horrible time in Cambodian history and saw so many atrocities committed countrywide. It finally ended when the Vietnamese invaded Cambodia in 1979 and Pol Pot's government fell. He lived for roughly another 20 years though, finally dying in 1998. Number 2 on this list is Joseph Stalin. Eckhard Merota writes, Joseph Stalin was dictator of the Soviet Union from 1922 till his death in 1953. As a young man, he was a robber and an assassin. For almost 30 years, he reigned with terror and violence in the Soviet Union. His decisions led to a famine that killed millions. Forget enemies, he even killed families of people who were fond of him. Under his rule, more than 1.5 million German women were assaulted, and in all, he easily killed over 20 million people. He once said, "One death is a tragedy, 1 million deaths is simply a statistic." Ironically, he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 1945 and 1948, and he died of a stroke in 1953. That famine that I just mentioned frankly does not get talked about nearly enough. Wikipedia writes, the Holodomor, also known as the Terror Famine or the Great Famine, was a famine in Soviet Ukraine from 1932 to 1933 that killed millions of Ukrainians. It was a large part of the wider Soviet famine of 1932-1933. The term Holodomor emphasizes the famine's man-made and allegedly intentional aspects such as rejection of outside aid, confiscation of all household foodstuffs, and restriction of population movement. As part of the wider Soviet famine of 1932-1933, which affected the major grain-producing areas of the country, millions of inhabitants of Ukraine, the majority of whom were ethnic Ukrainians, died of starvation in a peacetime catastrophe unprecedented in the history of Ukraine. Since 2006, this has been recognized by Ukrainians and 15 other countries as a genocide of the Ukrainian people carried out by the Soviet government. This was a famine that could have been prevented or dealt with, but just wasn't. It was actually intentional. There are reports of survivors who said that soldiers would come to their homes and specifically destroy any food that they had there for no reason. Stalin truly was void of emotion, and it's sad that a man like this actually existed. And finally, number 1 on this list is Hitler. I feel like this one should really be a no-brainer, guys. Adolf Hitler had so much hatred inside of him and was the architect of such overwhelming death that he has to be at the top of the list. Hitler was born in 1889 in Austria. He never had a great relationship with his family and fought often with his father. When he was younger, Hitler wanted to become an artist and would try and make a living by painting watercolors. Living off of being an artist is hard no matter how you try and do it, but it didn't help that public opinion of Hitler's work wasn't the best. Things changed for him though when World War I rolled around. He fought in this war from 1916 to 1918 and was actually awarded several medals for his service during this time. Experts say that World War I was a stark turning point for Hitler in his life, and this started him down the path that would later ruin so many lives. The Holocaust Encyclopedia writes, Adolf Hitler was the undisputed leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party since 1921. In 1923, he was arrested and imprisoned for trying to overthrow the German government. His trial brought him fame and followers. He used the subsequent jail time to dictate his political ideas in a book, Mein Kampf. Hitler's ideological goals included territorial expansion, consolidation of a racially pure state, and elimination of the European Jews and other perceived enemies of Germany. These goals were thankfully never achieved, but Hitler certainly did try. Over 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust, Hitler's sick and infamous genocide, and roughly 70 to 85 million people died in total during World War II as a whole. Nobody can say for sure that there wouldn't have been a Second World War if Hitler wasn't around, but it's clear that he played an extremely instrumental role in making it happen, which in turn caused so much suffering for the entire planet. A sick and evil man at his core, and somebody that the world could have used without.
Coming in at number 5, we have Bela Gunis. Bela Gunis got away with all of her crimes. In her pursuit of wealth, all of those around her perished. It is believed that she had around 40 victims between 1884 and 1908 before she disappeared without a trace. Bela was born in Norway and immigrated to the US in 1881. Her birth name was Brynhild but went by Bella. She was born in 1859. She decided to move to the US in search of money. One of her favorite ways to do this was through insurance claims. She met her first husband in 1884. He was a wealthy man who owned his own business. Not long after they were married, their home and store burned to the ground. They claimed the insurance for both buildings. Not long after this, her husband passed away due to heart failure. This was the first time it seemed suspicious, as he passed on the day his old and new life insurance policies overlapped. She claimed on both policies. Even with all of this insurance money, Bella was not done, and more unexplained deaths followed her sociopaths. She married her second husband, Peter Gunis. Not long after this, Peter's daughter and he himself passed away, along with her adopted daughter a few years later. It was at this point that Bella had bought herself a farm with a large amount of land where she spent the majority of her time. She began to use lovelorn columns to look for potential suitors. They would go to her farm, bringing with them large amounts of cash, but once they arrived, they were never found again. After years of this happening, Bella fled. An investigation found 40 victims on her property. She was never interrogated, so we will never know if there were other crimes that she committed. She was one of the most dangerous black widows of all time, leaving no man alive in her pursuit of wealth. Coming in at number 4, we have H.H. Holmes. H.H. Holmes was America's first ever serial killer. He was born in 1861, and the majority of his crimes took place during 1893. Some conspiracy theories even claim he was Jack the Ripper, but this is just a theory. Holmes was born in New Hampshire to an affluent family. He grew up privileged and was said to be unusually intelligent from a young age. He showed interest in the medical field and started to perform surgery on animals. There were even claims he could have been responsible for the death of his childhood friend. friend. His life of crime first began while he was studying medicine at the University of Michigan. He was found stealing corpses and using them to make false insurance claims and then experimenting on them. In 1885, he moved to Illinois, where he ran a pharmacy after the owner mysteriously vanished. With his respect in the community and family wealth, he began to construct a hotel nearby. The house was a maze of hidden passageways, trapdoors, and rooms soundproofed behind thick walls. His quarters were on the top floor, while guests would stay on the middle and ground. Although it seemed like a high-end hotel, many visitors did not ever check out. He had hidden rooms where he would trap and torture guests. He would leave them for days without food or water before dumping them down a chute to the basement where he'd set up his lab for his experiments. It was said not only did he lure guests to the hotel, but also those looking for employment. He would hope that if travelers went missing, no one would have known their last location or come looking. Before social media, it was not as easy to know where someone was staying while they traveled. He also had a habit of getting engaged just to have his fiancée disappear before they could get married. It is estimated that before his eventual arrest, he had taken the lives of 20 to 200 people throughout his life. This shocked the world. Nothing like this had ever happened before. People became a lot less trusting.
Number 3. Alfred Nobel. We're sort of seeing a pattern here. These people had somewhat of a good intention that later turned out to be not so good, which led us to even asking, were they even supposed to be born at all? Cruel, but food for thought. Alfred Nobel was a Swedish chemist, engineer, inventor, and philanthropist, and known for having sacrificed his entire fortune to establish the Nobel Prize, holding 355 patents of his own in his own lifetime. Smarty pants. Nobel's most famous invention? Dynamite. A safer and easier way of harnessing the explosive power of nitroglycerin. That sentence in itself is hilarious. And in 1867, it would soon be used worldwide for mining and infrastructure development, and oh yeah, pretty much blowing anything and everything up ever since. And of course, let's not forget the impact of dynamite's effect on a person, place, or thing in its vicinity. We've all seen the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoons. And this guy invented it. Dynamite. The stick, wick, and patented chemical compound was harnessed to do exactly that. And if we've read anything at all, it did a lot of bad. First off, how do you exactly tinker and tailor with an explosion? What happens when you can't crack the code? He's just in his basement like messing around with vials. Just a little bit more of that, little bit of this, and get down! The fact that this man did not blow himself up in any of these experiments is beyond me, and not only was this invention a new form of mass energy, in fact the Nobel Prize was created and named after him. He was the first. This invention and contribution was so ahead of its time in chemistry that it revolutionized the need to push evolution ahead through science. Its creation in itself is history for mankind. The dichotomy alone. Had this man known about all the cliche train track damsel in distress westerns that would have been parodied of this destructive invention, I don't know if he would have invented it in the first place. What do you think? Number 2, the Angel of Death. Okay. This guy definitely had it coming for sure with this list. The Angel of Death was a nickname given to this person for the disturbing amount of research he had collected via his specific scientific experiments. Why I think he shouldn't have been born at all is because to attain such groundbreaking information about the human body and its extremes, experiments needed to be run and not hypothesized. Joseph Mengele was a SS officer, doctor, and German scientist during World War II, and resulted in the leading of research closely related to the extremes and limitations of the capability of the human body, via DNA, via manipulation, and disease prevention, immunization, you name it. Any effect on the human body and its environment around them. I'm not going to get into what this person concocted up in his time as a medical captain, nor am I really going to make any jokes. This person pushed scientific research through the use of cruelty and pure evilness. Plain and simple. I don't like glorifying these people in these lists, and I can barely stand saying some of their names out loud. We know all of these people. Though the actual number of people's lives countlessly lost due to this man's sick fascination with pushing research and his scientific envelope hasn't been officially documented, these experiments were responsible for the deaths of somewhat of 6 million innocent lives. It is very clear that this person's intent was to derive violence, fear, and cruelty from day one, which I myself wish this person was never born. Crimes against humanity. No good. And number 1, nuclear fission. J. Robert Oppenheimer was an American theoretical physicist and was director of the Los Alamos Laboratory during the Manhattan Project, responsible for the research and creation of the very first atomic bomb. He is often known as the father of the atomic bomb, and his research in 1945 with nuclear fission, the result of smashing atoms into each other with the mass energy containment resulting in a massive explosion. A massive explosion, and that is an understatement. Just Google mushroom cloud. Scientists first developed nuclear technology during World War II. Thankfully, atomic bombs have been used only twice in war, both times by the United States at the end of World War II in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Fat Man and Little Boy were the official names given to the two explosive devices. Charming. What makes this so terrifying is that due to this research, the act of war and the structure of battles are now a thing of prehistoric past. The mass execution that these inventions can do is nuclear. Literally. I put Oppenheimer at the top of this list because the devastation alone due to the future with merely the technology surfacing is detrimental in itself. This is actually the first time reports that a visitor from another galaxy started. These explosions were so giant that its effect could be felt off planet. Yo, that's next level. Aliens just pulling up. Yeah, that's not really good, you know. If there was a time in the future which we could send back AI, it would probably be due to this stuff. Oppenheimer was awarded the Medal of Merit from President Harry Truman in 1946 for the push in science, even if its push was in the wrong direction. All these people given awards, it's like, hey, good job. It's terrible stuff, but cheers.
Number 5 on this list is Edward Edwards. Edward Edwards, for those who don't know, was an American serial killer who did most of his killing from 1977 to 1996. He has 5 confirmed kills to his name, however he's suspected of several additional murders that were never solved. Edward always had an affinity to crime. In 1955, he actually escaped from jail and went around America robbing gas stations and was at large for 7 years. He became so well known that he actually earned a spot on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list at the time. He also refused to disguise himself during these robberies because he claimed that he wanted to become famous. Eventually, in 1962, he was found and brought in. He was sent to jail, but didn't actually spend too long there considering what he had already done. He was out on parole in 1967, which, as we'll later learn, was a horrible idea. The first known murders that Edward committed were in 1977 when he killed William Lavico and his girlfriend Judith Straub. They were both very young and he took them out into the woods and shot them both with a shotgun. 3 years after this incident, he murdered 2 people again. This time the victims were named Tim Hack and Kelly Drew, and instead of being shot, they were stabbed and strangled. Then in 1996 was his last confirmed murder, that of Danny Law Glockner. This was actually Edward's foster son, and he admitted to killing him for the life insurance policy of $250,000. In an interview, Edward very matter-of-factly owns up to killing Danny and shows zero remorse at all. He goes on to say that he was a schemer, and he'd always been a schemer and was looking for a way to earn a quick buck. He said that he had planned this thing for over a year and had been preparing everything for that long. In the interview, he very carefully lays out everything that happened and does it in a manner that it seems as if he's almost boasting about it. He even talks about how he took his head and threw it into a forest a year later after animals had bitten it off, and he doesn't even blink. Edward Edwards was an extremely sick and twisted man who clearly was not capable of feeling any normal and healthy human emotions. He died in prison back in 2011. Number 4 on this list is Tommy Lynn Sells. Tommy Lynn Sells is right up there as being one of the worst serial killers of all time. The acts that he committed were so gruesome and just plain evil that I can't even begin to understand the level of inhumanity that it would have taken to do it. He was only convicted for 1 murder, which he received the death penalty for, but authorities believe that he committed upwards of 22. Tommy Lynn Sells was known for murdering mothers and their... He didn't just stop with them though, also killing the fathers from time to time, but there was definitely a bit of a pattern involved with the mothers. In an interview that he had while he was still alive, he comes up with a sick and twisted reason as to why he did this.
I know what I went through as a child. The nightmares, the drama, the reality of who I was and what was done to me. I never wanted that to happen to another person.
Tommy Lynn Sells argues that he killed children to put them out of their misery.
I don't even know if there are adjectives in the English language to describe how messed up that is. Tommy Lynn Sells was eventually executed on April 3rd, 2014.
Coming in at number 3 we have Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, was born in 1960 in Texas. He was one of 5 children. When he was 5 years old, he was knocked unconscious by a swing. It was said that this caused great trauma to his brain and he began experiencing epileptic fits. As he was growing up, he grew close to his cousin Miguel. He had returned from fighting the war in Vietnam. He would tell Richard stories of his torture of soldiers and women while he was at war. Horrifying stories that he was proud to tell. He even had photos to show him of what he had done. At the age of 13, Richard witnessed his cousin taking the life of his wife. When he was 14, he dropped out of school. He was arrested for the first time at 17 for possession of marijuana. He then moved to California where he started to do crimes to get by. He started to cultivate an interest in Satanism, leading him down an even darker path. His theft turned to violence in 1984 when he committed his first home invasion. In the 60s, it was more common to leave your doors unlocked as people were not as concerned about safety issues in their neighborhoods. Richard took advantage of this. He would move in the dead of night, stalking women who were home alone. At first, his attacks would be months apart, but they soon got more frequent. Although some of his victims managed to escape, he was still able to avoid detection. They could not track him down, but his satanic symbolism left at the scene was a clear indication that it was his doing. He soon coined the term Night Stalker as he snuck into people's homes during the night undetected. In his final attack, he left a footprint. His car was spotted and his victim gave a detailed witness report. This led to his eventual capture. He was beaten by LA residents while attempting to steal a car. His face was all over the media at this point and he had nowhere to hide. During his rampage throughout a number of years, he took the lives around 14 and attacked dozens more. He spent the rest of his life in prison. Coming in at number 2 we have Charles Manson. Charles Manson was a cult leader in the late 1960s. His cult went on to make history after their brutal acts carried out under his command. Born Charles Maddox in 1934, his mother was only 16 and suffering from addiction problems. His mother married William Manson, giving him the famous last name, but the marriage ended quickly and Charles was sent to a boys' school. His mother rejected any attempt he made to return to her and he was soon living on the streets doing petty crimes to get by. Over the next 20 years he was in and out of prison. In 1967 he was released and decided to move to San Francisco. Feeling cast out from his own mother, he started his cult and referred to them as the family. He grew his cult to around 100 followers who shared his passion for an unconventional lifestyle. The Manson family eventually moved to a deserted ranch in San Fernando Valley. His following included a large number of young girls who believed he was a prophet. These girls were often used to lure victims or other members to the cult. It is thought that the cult carried out around 35 attacks before they were finally stopped. One of the most well known of their victims was actress Sharon Tate, who was pregnant at the time of her attack. It was in August 1969 he gathered together his most loyal to attack Hollywood's elite. He wanted to go for the beautiful people with fame and money. It was said that Manson felt rejected by the showbiz world when he had attempted to get his own recording contract and wanted revenge. He himself did not take part in any of the actual violence. When the family was arrested, the police had no idea that they committed these acts of violence. They were arrested for vandalizing the property they were staying on. One of the members gave a confession and they finally connected them to the crime. The members were given life in prison. At the trial, they showed no remorse in their acts and even said they wished they had done more. And finally, in at number 1 we have Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was a notorious American criminal. He was born in 1946 and started to commit his crimes during the 70s. There are many novels, films and TV shows about his life. What was the most disturbing about Ted was his ability to live a normal life and even being well liked while he was committing these horrible acts. He lived a normal life and was seen as a successful, intelligent man. His mother Eleanor was a single mother when she gave birth to him. No one ever knew who the biological father was, although there have been some guesses over the years. When he was born, much of Eleanor's family shamed her for having an illegitimate child. He was seen as a sin and the family's dirty secret. For many years, Ted was told that his mother was his sister, and he was adopted by his grandparents. Eleanor eventually took Ted and moved to Washington. His mother married Johnny Bundy, and although Ted took his last name, he did not have respect for this new stepfather. He believed he was too uneducated and working class for his family. They went on to have more children, although it does not appear Ted was close to any of his siblings. At a young age, he became obsessed with knives. Then as a teenager, he grew the obsession of watching people through their windows and stealing things he wanted with no sign of remorse. He went on to earn a degree in psychology and was active in the community. speaking. He worked on the campaign for the Republican governor and even received an award for his work. He had his first heartbreak during the school days, and later on it was clear some of his victims resembled the girl who had left him. His crimes would often consist of luring women into his car. They would never be seen again. During the 70s, when he was working in the community and seen as a charismatic professional, this is when he was the most active with his crimes. He would travel around taking the lives of these women and then be back at work the next morning. When he was finally caught, everyone who knew him was shocked. He portrayed himself so well no one could believe he would do this. Even once he was on trial, he gained a following of women worshipping him. They didn't care about his crimes against his victims. One of the victims finally escaped in 1975, and this began the downfall. Though he somehow escaped from prison twice, he was eventually captured for the last time and sentenced to the electric chair.
Kicking this list off, we have Frankenstein. Okay, not really the Dr. Frankenstein that we know and love, but the man who Mary Shelley based the novel off of, and around. Well, one of them at least. Mad scientists are still puzzled by the works of one Johann Conrad Dippel. Dippel was born at Castle Frankenstein in Germany, where he would attend university as a philosopher. He studied theology, philosophy, and alchemy at the University of Gießen, obtaining a master's degree in 1693. In the 1700s, he then turned to Hermetic studies and alchemy, and this is where it gets a little mad scientisty. There are claims that during his experiments at Castle Frankenstein, he practiced alchemy and anatomy at the same time, on both the living and the deceased. Yeah. Creepy. Dippel even said that the rumors were true that he had sold his soul to the devil in exchange for secret knowledge. Yeah, that'll do it. He had a huge reputation surrounding dark sorcery, specifically for his work around the Philosopher's Stone and his claim to fame, the elixir of life. He performed experiments with cadavers and attempted to transfer the soul of one to another. Yeah, he was obsessed with this idea of soul transference with barely and freshly dead people. Common experiments among alchemists at the time though. One night apparently while he was working with nitroglycerin and the effect on magnetism and electricity apparently led to the destruction and a huge explosion at Castle Frankenstein. It was this night that he apparently was messing around with lightning and the answer to all his ailments came to him. Local mythology and lore recounts huge explosions and lightning emitted from the castle that night. I guess this was a pretty infamous night. It seems like it's right out of the book, no? Apparently this was the night he acquired the knowledge behind creating the elixir of life, his pride and joy. So what exactly happened that night at Castle Frankenstein? Huge lightning storm, or was this guy opening portals looking for souls? You tell me. Number 4, electro. Okay, they were definitely onto something back then. Lots of magnets and souls and electricity going on. It's 1803. Giovanni Aldini was an Italian physician and physicist born in Bologna, Italy. He, just like the other Dr. Frankenstein, liked to conduct high amounts of electricity through corpses to see what they could do. Yeah, sinister stuff. But science, you know? They like to do these crazy experiments and then write it down and stuff. Lab coats, you know. I have a weak stomach. I could never have sat through these experiments. Since electricity was relatively new at the time, all these zany ideas from these mad scientists multiplied the more playing around with it. Soon, it became otherworldly. The obsession around electricity, magnets, souls, other realms, they were hypothesizing leading to some pretty evil stuff. In 1803, the fresh body of a murderer was pulled down from the gallows of Newgate Prison in London and taken to the Royal College of Surgeons for experimenting. There, before an audience of doctors and physicists, Giovanni attempted to breach realms and return the corpse from beyond the grave. Ooh, okay. Homemade batteries and magnets was used, which made the deceased muscles contort aggressively, and apparently his eyes even opened, looking around the room. Giovanni then stuck the rod where the sun don't shine, then made the whole body start to move about as if it had come to life. For years, he was the leading scientist in electricity and its effect on the body. Apparently some claim that Aldini would even experiment on himself, pushing the limits and dialing up the voltage. Dude, this guy's Electro from Spider-Man. In recognition of his merits, the Emperor of Austria made him a Knight of the Iron Crown and died not many years later. And although he was unsuccessful at bringing souls back from the dead using electricity, I'm sure this guy experienced more than he shared. I wonder who has his journal.
Number 3 on this list is Bernard Giles. Bernard Giles is currently serving several life imprisonments for killing 5 between September and November of 1973. He was only 21 years old when he committed these crimes and had a wife and a child at the time. He would get in his vehicle and drive around on highways looking for young women who needed a lift. These hitchhikers would get into his car and before they knew what was happening, Bernard would strike. In the clip that I'm about to show you, Bernard is far older. A lot of years have passed since he's been imprisoned, but here he tries to recount his first killings.
That day that you went out, when you did kill for the first time, was that a morning when you woke up and you were with your wife and daughter and something hit you and you went,
No,
today may be the day?
every day may be the day.
Every day.
Every day may be the day.
So there are multiple things about that clip which makes it one of the most chilling to me. I think what really gets me though is how he talks about every day being the possible day. Literally at any point, without warning, these serial killers could snap and then go on a rampage. And they don't even remember who it was that they killed. At least we know that Bernard Giles will be spending the rest of his existence locked behind bars. Number 2 on this list is Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was one of the most ruthless and prolific serial killers that we've ever known. He targeted young women in the 1970s and confessed to killing over 30 of them. How many women he actually killed is unknown, but the number is thought to be significantly higher than that. He engaged in all types of sick and sadistic stuff, things that I can't get too deep into on YouTube because they were just simply that bad. A member of his own defense team even came out and said Ted was the very definition of heartless evil. Whenever your defense team is coming out and saying that, you know that there's no redeeming you. Bundy died back in 1989 by means of state-sanctioned electrocution. Before he was executed though, Ted Bundy had one final interview. This interview took place in the evening of the day prior to him being executed. Watching this man who killed so many people and knowing that he's going to be executed the following day, there's just this cloud of darkness that hangs over the whole interview. Ted Bundy described what it was like to kill someone by saying, "I want you to understand what happened. It was like coming out of some kind of horrible trance or dream. I can only liken it to being possessed by something so awful and alien, and then the next morning wake up from it, remember what happened, and realize that basically in the eyes of the law, and certainly in the eyes of God, you're responsible." Now everybody, he may sound almost remorseful in that little excerpt, but do not be fooled. This was a man who had intercourse with the dead bodies of the people he killed. There was truly not an ounce of good in this man at all. Number 1 on this list is Manuel Vela. The crimes committed by Manuel Vela actually happened not too long ago, which makes this whole story that much more scary. Manuel was a 28-year-old man who only a few years ago killed his girlfriend, who was 39 weeks pregnant with his child. Like guys, we are talking about just some of the most sick and twisted stuff ever. After he was finally apprehended, an interview took place. In that interview, he says that the only reason he was with his girlfriend all this time was to eventually kill her, and he had told her this time and time again.
Why did you stay with her?
Oh, to kill her.
So that was your only purpose this whole time?
Yes, kill her.
And you made it pretty clear to her that that was your whole purpose as well?
Yeah. Told everybody, hey, I'm gonna kill you, right? I'm telling him to kill her.
So apparently this guy had been telling her about this for years and was planning it this whole time. This is just some insane stuff that is honestly hard to break down. I have no idea how anyone could get to this place or what would cause something like this. Manuel Vela ended up taking his own life in January 2017.
Number 5, Niccolo Paganini. The first up on our list today of people who summoned the devil or a demon of some kind is Niccolo Paganini, who was once called the devil's violinist, which is quite the nickname. Looks great on a resume. I didn't know the devil really hired help like that. Paganini, which does sound a bit like a delicious sandwich, was born in 1782 in Genoa, Italy. Under his father's influence, he was given lessons by renowned violinists, quickly becoming a prodigy. His musical talents were praised, and he was given all manner of scholarships. He had his first performance at 11, and by age 15, he was already touring around Italy performing, just in case you needed something to compare yourself to and feel bad about your own achievements. Don't feel bad. I'm 26, I haven't toured Italy once. He was particularly well known for being able to perform recitals without sheet music. He memorized everything and was apparently able to play 12 notes a second at an inhuman speed. Now, while this could be explained by the fact that he'd been raised to play the violin in a Spartan-like upbringing, locals around Genoa began to whisper and tell stories of how he must have sold his soul to be able to play the violin like that. It also didn't help much that Niccolo's pale, lanky, and quite ghost-like appearance made people a bit suspicious of the guy. I get it, as someone who's very tall, lanky, and ghost-like, people ask me all the time, Taylor, did you sell your soul to be so good at YouTube hosting? The answer? Yes. Paganini was a striking man with hollow cheeks, pale skin, and very long, thin fingers, which did not calm any of these rumors down. These things plagued his reputation, with people claiming outlandish things, saying they'd seen him with hooves, they'd seen him talking to the devil. Some say his violin was made out of the intestines of a woman he'd slain, and her soul was trapped in his violin, which I guess would make it sound beautiful? Now, in the end, Paganini would contract tuberculosis, and found himself getting weaker and weaker as the months and years went by. Before his death, he turned away last rites from a Catholic priest, saying he didn't need them because he wasn't going to die. He would pass shortly after. Was it because he'd already made his last rites with Satan, or was he just confident? It's up to you to decide. And if you're looking for more freaky stories of demonic possession, exorcisms, and all that jazz, we've got loads of that on the channel. If ghosts and goblins ain't your jam, we've got cryptids, conspiracies, aliens, government cover-ups, basically anything scary above or under the sun, we've covered it more than a few times. So click on through, hit that bell to not miss a single scream, but please, do that at the end of this video, okay? We got way more scary stories coming up for you. Number 4, Latoya Ammons. Our next entry on this list is Latoya Ammons and her mother Rosa Campbell, involving an infamous haunting that is sometimes referred to as the 200 Demon House or the Demon House. That's a lot of demons. A family moved into a new house in Gary, Indiana, only to quickly discover that the house already had plenty of residents. They claimed that black flies would swarm the porch every single day in December in a climate that should reasonably have had them die off. Mother Rosa Campbell claims she heard footsteps in the basement and doors creaking, and witnessed a shadowy specter of a man pacing around her living room, claiming he was leaving behind boot prints. Now that's pretty scary. But the most wild claim was that this spirit man once choked her directly. Rosa's daughter Latoya claimed that she levitated above her daughter while unconscious during a sleepover, leading to her friend praying for her safety until she returned to the ground. Another wild incident describes an unknown force pushing the son of the family firmly into a wall, with a voice in the back of his head screaming, "It's time to die." Strangely, the family didn't decide to, burn the house down and move out and change state lines, but instead reached out to their family physician. You know the old saying, when there's something strange, who are you gonna call? Your local general practitioner. Well, the doc visited the house and noted that he thought the behavior of the family was delusional. So the family went to Father Michael Maganote in 2012, who was called in to perform an exorcism. He believed the family had unintentionally summoned a demon and were being tormented by hundreds of demons. And the real estate agent didn't mention that, did he? In the end, the father exorcised the house, and the Ammons family moved to Indianapolis in peace, where they now await a movie deal from 20th Century Fox, I'm certain.
Number 3, Vlad the Impaler. Also known as Vlad Dracula, he was the Prince of Wallachia 3 times between 1448 and his death in 1476 or 77. The character of Dracula was loosely based on Vlad due to his sadistic personality and cruel acts done to the people of Wallachia, where he reigned as prince 3 times between 1448 to 1462 and killed about 20% of the population. Works containing the stories about Vlad's cruelty were published in Low German in the Holy Roman Empire before 1480. The stories were allegedly written in the early 1460s because they describe Vlad's campaign across the Danube in early 1462, but they do not refer to Mehmed II's invasion of Wallachia in June of the same year. So the stories about Vlad's plundering raids in Transylvania were clearly based on eyewitness accounts, because they contain accurate details including the lists of churches raided by Vlad that were destroyed and, the dates of the raids. They describe Vlad as a demented psychopath, a sadist, a gruesome killer, and a masochist worse than Caligula and Nero. One tale explains that Vlad had a big copper cauldron built and he put a lid made of wood with holes in it on top. He put people in the cauldron and put their heads in the holes and fastened them there. He then filled it with water and set a fire under it and let people cry their eyes out until they were boiled to death. And then he invited frightening, terrible, unheard of punishment. He ordered that woman be impaled together with their suckling young on the same stake, stuck on their mother's breasts until they died. Then he had the woman's breasts cut off and put the little ones inside head first, thus he had them impaled together. He impaled victims through the buttocks until the stake came out of the mouth. A German pamphlet once read that he had young folks roasted, and then he fed them to their mothers. And he also cut off the breasts of women and forced their husbands to eat them. Yeah, nightmare cruelty. Number 2, Joseph Stalin. If I had a nickel for every time I've mentioned an evil Joseph today, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that happened twice, right? So this man was dictator of the Soviet Union from 1922 until his death in 1953. As a young man, he was a robber and an assassin, so simply, bad guy stuff. For almost 30 years, he reigned with terror and violence. His decisions led to a famine that killed millions. Stalin promoted Marxism and Leninism abroad through the Communist International and supported European anti-fascist movements during the 1930s, particularly in the Spanish Civil War. In 1939, his regime signed a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany, enabling the Soviet invasion of Poland. Stalin's necessity for the Soviet Union's economic development has been questioned, and it has been argued that his policies from 1928 onwards may have only been a limiting factor. So Stalin's Soviet Union has been characterized as a totalitarian state, with Stalin as its authoritarian leader. Various biographers have described him as a dictator, an autocrat, or accused him of practicing Caesarism. He's also been labeled a red fascist. Heck, forget enemies, he even killed families of people who were fond of him. Under his rule, more than 1.5 million German women were sexually harmed, and all in all, he easily killed over 20 million people. He once said, "One death is a tragedy. A million deaths is simply a statistic." In the mother of all what the bleep sentences, he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 1945 and 1948. Number 1, Jim Jones. As if I was going to do a list of the worst people in the world and not include a single cult leader. In the 1950s, Indiana native Jim Jones founded the People's Temple, a group that he claimed promoted socialism and equality with religious elements of Christianity. Initially, he was, not much more than a charismatic hustler who faked faith healings by having audience plants pull chicken livers out of congregants' mouths. But as the years progressed, he demanded more and more of his followers. In the early 1970s, he moved his group to California and set them up in a commune-like settlement in Redwood Valley. After he established several locations throughout the state, including its headquarters in San Francisco, the temple forged ties with many left-wing political figures and claimed to have 20,000 members, even though 3,000 to 5,000 is a little more likely. Jones eventually came to believe that nuclear war was imminent and moved his followers again to the South American country of Guyana, which he thought would be outside the potential danger zone. The group lived there for several years as the People's Temple Agricultural Project, but after former members started speaking out against the church, San Francisco Congressman Leo Ryan decided to travel to Jonestown to investigate claims of bad things. During his visit, a number of temple members expressed a desire to leave with him and accompanied Leo to the local airstrip at Port Kituma. There they were intercepted by self-styled temple security guards who opened fire on the group, killing the congressman, 3 journalists, and one of the defectors, as well as injuring 9 others, including Ryan's aide, Jackie Spire. A few seconds of the incident were captured on video by NBC cameraman Bob Brown, one of the journalists killed in the attack. That evening in Jonestown, Jones ordered his congregation to drink a concoction of the cyanide-laced, grape-flavored Flavor Aid. Oh yeah, so this is where the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid originates, but it was actually Flavor Aid. All in all, 918 people died, including 276 minors. When members wept and showed signs of dissent, Jones counseled, stop these hysterics. This is not the way for people who are socialists or communists to die. No way for us to die. We must die with some dignity. On a tape, he can be heard saying, "Don't be afraid to die," adding that death is just stepping over into another plane and a friend. So Jones directed that the youngest folks be killed first. His wife Marceline apparently protested against this. She was then forcibly restrained, but eventually joined the other adults in poisoning herself. Some members resisted ending their lives and were injected with fatal doses of cyanide, as were those too young to drink the drink, and some others survived by fleeing through the jungle. Until 9/11, it was the largest loss of American civilian life in history, which sends a chill down my spine to talk about. In 5th place, we have the case of Anneliese Michel. She grew up practicing Christianity in Bavaria, West Germany, in the 1960s, where she attended Mass twice a week. When Anneliese was only 16, she suddenly blacked out at school and began walking around in what her friends and family described as a trance-like state, and she herself was unable to recall any of it. A year later, Anneliese experienced a similar occurrence where she woke up in a trance after her body went through a series of convulsions, causing it to shake uncontrollably. After this, Anneliese visited a neurologist who diagnosed her with temporal lobe epilepsy, a disorder that causes seizures, loss of memory, and experiencing visual and auditory hallucinations. After her diagnosis, Anneliese began taking medication for her epilepsy and enrolled in the University of Wurzburg in 1973. Now, if that medication was successful, I wouldn't be talking about her right now, would I? The medication she was given failed to help her, and as the year progressed, her condition deteriorated. She began to see the face of the devil wherever she went, and constantly heard demons whispering in her ears. When she heard the demons telling her she was damned and would rot in hell while she was praying, she concluded that the devil himself must be possessing her. Anneliese sought out priests to help her with her demonic possession, but all the clergy she approached rejected her requests, saying that she should seek medical help and that they would need the permission of a bishop to do anything. Now at this point, Anneliese's state had become extreme. With the knowledge that she was possessed consuming her, she constantly ripped the clothes off her body, compulsively performed up to 400 squats a day, crawled under a table, and barked like a dog for 2 days. Hey, who needs a gym, right? She also ate spiders and coal, bit the head off a dead bird, and licked her own fluids from the floor. Oh, I'm not queasy, why do you ask? Finally, she and her mother found a priest, Ernst Alt, who believed in her possession, stating that she didn't look like an epileptic. If I'm taking this with a grain of salt, I'd like to know what his definition of an epileptic looks like. Annalise wrote to Ernst, "I am nothing, everything about me is vanity. What should I do? I have to improve. You pray for me. I want to suffer for other people, but this is so cruel." Ernst petitioned the local bishop, Bishop Joseph Stang, who eventually approved the request and granted local priest Arnold Renz the permission to perform an exorcism, but ordered that it be carried out in total secrecy. Now, being granted an exorcism in the 70s was like winning the lottery. They were very rarely granted due to the sensationalism caused by the release of The Exorcist, and the Catholic Church was determined to protect their reputation. Reputation at the time. Fine, reputation on exorcisms at the time. I know, it's the church. Over the next 10 months, following the bishop's approval of Annalise's exorcism, Ernst and Arnold conducted 67 exorcisms, lasting up to 4 hours per session on the poor woman. Absolutely heinous. Through these sessions, Annalise revealed that she was possessed by 6 demons, Lucifer, Cain, and Nero, amongst others. And that just there was how I learned that Nero was more than just a former Jeff Hardy gimmick. Weird middle name to give a kid. All these spirits would jostle for control of Annalise's body and would communicate from her mouth with a low growl. The demons constantly argued with each other, with one being quoted as saying, "People are stupid as pigs. They think it's all over after death. It goes on." And another replying that the first was nothing but a big mouth who had no real say in hell. Throughout these sessions, Annalise would frequently talk about dying to make up for the wayward youth of the day and apostate priests of the modern church. She broke the bones and ripped the tendons in her knees from continually kneeling in prayer, and I just felt that statement in my own ballet-worn knees. Ouch. Over these 10 months, Annalise was frequently restrained so the priest could conduct exorcism rites. She slowly stopped eating and eventually passed from malnutrition and dehydration on July 1st, 1976 at only 23 years old. In 4th place, we have the nuns of Loudun and Louviers. Louviers? My French is 50-50 right now. Time to hop in my little time machine and head back to 1642 when 18 nuns became possessed. Father Mathurin Picard, the nunnery director, and Father Thomas Boule, the vicar at Louviers, were convicted on the evidence of the possessed nuns' recounts. The youngest of the group, being only 18 years old at the time, Sister Madeleine Bavin, was the initial possession victim. Her testimony was successful in throwing the church into a state of panic, alleging that Fathers Picard and Boule had taken the nuns to secret sabbats. At these gatherings, they became familiar with numerous demons, specifically including the demon Damon. Try saying that without tripping over your tongue. Nah. Testimonies quickly followed from the other nuns, reinforcing Madeleine's claims, and after further investigation from the church and its authorities, it was discovered that the nuns were suffering from the classic symptoms of possession. The exorcism rites that followed were made public, enabling the entire town of Louviers to become totally engrossed in the church and its proceedings. After the exorcisms, Madeleine was imprisoned for life, Father Boule was burned at the stake, and the corpse of Father Picard, who had already passed, was exhumed and burned. Moving into the 17th century, in the French village of Loudun, an entire convent of Ursuline nuns were possessed by a series of demons with names such as Leviathan, Astaroth, and Zabulon. These nuns appeared during a series of trials that accused the parish priest, Urbain Grandier, of having made a pact with Satan. Photos of the signed pact still exist, with autographs from the devil and the previous mentioned demons possessing the nuns. In a series of public trials and exorcisms, these nuns barked, screamed, convulsed, and spoke in devil language. These sights led to a public hysteria that ultimately ended in Urbain being burnt at the stake. The events of the Loudun possessions were turned into a book by Aldous Huxley called The Devils of Loudun in 1952, which was then adapted as the 1971 film The Devils. Anyone want to have a movie night?
Number 3, Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson could play the blues real well. In fact, he played it so darn well that people suspected he wasn't just really in tune with the music, but had made a deal with the devil to pluck the strings. Johnson was born in Mississippi in May 1911 and lived alongside his 9 siblings. Good gosh, imagine the rush for the bathroom in the mornings. He eventually made his way to Memphis, where he discovered his love for the blues, and boy howdy could he play them. By all accounts, he was a legendary harmonica player, but initially his friends would describe him as a pretty lousy guitarist. Well, practice makes perfect, right? Well, practice and demonic transaction. Because the story goes that Johnson would disappear for a few weeks entirely and buried his guitar at the crossroads of the now famous Highways 49 and 61 in Clarksdale, Mississippi, where the devil retuned his instrument and blessed his hands with the unnatural skills that made him a legend. When he started playing again, he was an overnight master of the blues. Now, unfortunately, the blues is born out of tragedy, and Robert Johnson was sadly no different. He passed away at the fairly early age of 27, the infamous age in which rock stars and famous musicians are purported to die with an alarming regularity. Amy Winehouse, Kurt Cobain, to rattle off a few. What makes this particular death odd, though, is how few details exist. His death was never reported, no autopsy ever performed, no cause ever given. The only thing we have to go on is local folklore. One in particular tells the story of Johnson playing at a country dance, where Johnson had been flirting with a married woman, and she gave Johnson a bottle of whiskey, which was slapped out of his hands by Sonny Boy Williamson, another musician at the exact same show. And he told him not to drink anything that he hadn't personally seen the lid come off of, which is fairly good advice. And Johnson responded by saying, "Don't ever knock a drink out of my hand." Johnson would die in a convulsive state 3 days later, with some believing that he'd been poisoned by the woman and her husband as revenge. Or perhaps it was just the devil coming back for the merchandise that he'd paid for, his soul. Number 2, Agrippa. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa was a scholar living in the 15th century with one of the coolest names ever. Corny Agrippa. Agrippa devoted his life to writing about the occult. Now, I can freely talk to you about the occult, the devil, and all manner of blasphemous heretical things, but things haven't always been so liberal. And way back when, even so much of breathing about the devil was tantamount to sinning, so Agrippa was not a man without controversy. He wrote of the devil in great intricate detail. His books would include information breaking down exactly how witches cast spells and perform incantations and rituals, and even shared where they get all of their cool outfits, big hats, and big stomping boots. It's mostly Hot Topic and Doll Skill. So where did Agrippa get all of this information? Was he just making it up? Was he really in tune with the local scene? Kind of. He claimed that when he was a young man, he gave in to the temptation of Satan and ran with a convent of witches, going around engaging in rituals and casting spells, and I gotta be honest, that sounds awesome. I did a similar thing when I followed Grimes on tour. Eventually, Agrippa is said to have cleaned up a little, got over his goth phase, and said to have found Jesus and saved his soul, and began to write books preaching the good word about how you should let Jesus in your life and push the devil on out of here. Surprisingly, Agrippa was never executed despite his open nature regarding his witchcraft and occult days. It's a common misconception that he was executed for his heresy, but actually in the end, Agrippa pushed people for be more understanding of demons and the devil, and pushed for people to know their enemy. He wanted to save people from the devil's grasp and save them through prayer rather than just burning them all at the stake, which is a noble goal. And number 1, Anna Eklund. Perhaps you've heard the story of Anna Eklund before. We've covered it on the channel, I think, and it was made into a popular movie, appropriately enough titled The Exorcism of Anna Eklund, so you don't confuse it with any other exorcism movies out there. Now, Anna's story is infamous. She's a young woman from America who has the dubious award of having the world's longest exorcism, spanning decades of exercising. Those demons were in there good. Those are demons with like rent control. You are not getting them out of that apartment. It will begin in 1912 when Eklund underwent an exorcism by Father Theophilus Reisinger, a Bavarian priest. It seemed like things were successful and Anna was freed, but then in 1928, Anna began exhibiting all the telltale signs of demonic possession yet again, and Reisinger returned to perform a second exorcism on Eklund. Eklund was taken into a convent on August 1928 to be dealt with round the clock. She would behave oddly, to say the least, hissing at them like a cat, flying into fits of violent rage when offered food that had been doused in holy water. This exorcism was brutal even by exorcism standard, with Eklund allegedly levitating, howling, hanging out the door frame. Eklund was believed to be possessed by not just any old rank-and-file demon, but allegedly was possessed by Judas Iscariot, big celebrity demon inside, alongside the ghost of her own father. Alongside the ghost of her own father, who had an affair with her aunt and had made unwanted advances to Anna in life. After months of exercising, and not the good kind, Anna's body deteriorated. She would vomit up debris, her head and face swelled, she refused to consume food or drink. Eventually, after months and years of exorcism, on December 23rd, the final day of the exorcism, the battle was won and Anna was freed, and by all accounts went on to live a fairly normal life afterwards. A Christmas miracle if there ever was one. Number 5. Grigory Rasputin. Grigory Rasputin, the mad monk of Russia, was a mystical healer who wandered Russia in the early 20th century. Now, I could do a plot summary of what Rasputin got up to, but honestly, Boney M did a better job than I ever will, so just alt tab out of this video real quick, listen to that song, come on back. Okay. Did you? Well, if you didn't, the quick rundown is that the black monk genuinely believed himself to be a holy healer with otherworldly powers, and was appointed a lofty position by Tsarina Alexandra to heal the young prince of his hemophilia. He was rumored to be part of a secret order called Klisti, connected with all sorts of scandalous practices. Now, no official connection was ever made to Rasputin and the sect. Rumors of the man still persisted. He carried an infamous reputation around the country, with stories of his wild debauchery and black magic, stories of wild powers. Did he really have otherworldly powers? Given his infamous nigh immortality, I am a bit inclined to agree with him. The man simply could not be put down without serious effort. There was a plot to have him enticed by a courtesan and castrated until he caught wind of it. In 1914, he was in the chest by a beggar and shrugged it off like it was nothing. Now, of course, the most famous story of Rasputin was his assassination at the hands of the Tsar's cousin and a handful of noblemen. As the famous legend goes, he was poisoned, bludgeoned, and drowned, and still that wasn't enough until he passed later in the day. Was Rasputin just Russia's toughest customer, built different? Or did he have some sort of mystical help from another world? We may never know. Hey, are we having fun with the channel, my little freaks and creeps? Stay subscribed for more scary content every single day. Number 4. Vlad the Impaler. You know, with a title like Vlad the Impaler, it's safe to assume that the guy was probably up to no good, demon or no demon. Perhaps you've heard the legend that Vlad Tepes was the inspiration for Count Dracula, which should tell you even more if you want to judge of this guy's moral character. Vlad was a prince of Wallachia, an area that's now known as modern Romania. Vlad grew up in a very dark period of Wallachian history, coming up while the Ottoman Empire was setting its sights on just about everything good in Eastern Europe. Vlad was made king of Wallachia, but first he was deposed and exiled after an assassination plot on his brother and father. He would reclaim the throne in 1458 and quickly began a campaign of bloodlust to show the world he was not someone you should be messing with. One of his most infamous acts, and where the dubious title comes from, was after fending off an Ottoman invasion, he impaled 20,000 soldiers and left them as a grim forest of the damned. And some legends say he would eat dinner in front of this. Downright demonic behavior. There's some debate as to whether or not he really is the inspiration for Dracula, although of note is that beside his infamous sobriquet Vlad the Impaler, he went by the nickname Vlad Dracul, owning from his father's position in the Order of the Dragon, which translated to Dracul. There are also stories of Vlad washing his hands with the blood of his enemies, which I'm gonna be honest, that kind of sounds like something Dracula would do. It's worth noting too, no one really knows what happened to Vlad's body. We know that he was slain in battle, and that he was eventually put down after years of carnage, but his body or grave has never been found. Perhaps it's because it's still walking, or flapping. Whatever a bat does.
In third place, we have John Jenkin, who also happens to be the most recent case on this list. In the summer of 2013, 25-year-old John from Cumbria, England, expressed fears that he would kill his mother. If it was just a fear, you can't relate some days. Well, in his deranged state, he approached a random van driver, put his hands in the air in a surrender motion, and cried out, "I am armed, but it's not in my hands." Desperate to avoid committing such an atrocity, John tried to end his life by downing a cocktail of whiskey, painkillers, LSD, and attempting to end himself in a river. He was discovered later that day, unstable, and smeared with his own red fluid after self-inflicting. After these events, John was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, where staff judged him as low risk and released him. I'm no expert, but I'd hate to see high risk if that's considered, minimal? Later that evening, he confessed to a group of friends that he was possessed by demons, stating, "I am the devil, I need to confess." He said his mother had become aggressive and controlling after the events of that day. And that same night, his sister Katie had confided in one of her own friends that she was really worried about her brother, saying that he didn't seem like her brother and he didn't look like her brother anymore. The next morning, after a brutal argument with his mother and sister, he went downstairs and hit his mother with lots of blows to her head with a sharp end of an axe, and when his sister came downstairs, he attacked her as well to stop her from screaming. I guess the sister was sadly right to be worried. Now, after the killings, John was found stark naked, crouched behind a bench, acting erratically. When a police officer asked him if he had taken anything, he simply replied, lives. A court has since sentenced him to a minimum of only 12 years in prison. In second place, time to meet Michael Taylor. In the 1970s, Michael Taylor was largely an ordinary figure in the town of Ossett, Yorkshire. He, his wife Christine, their 5 children, and their pet poodle lived peaceful and happy lives. And now to, pop that Stepford Wives bubble. In 1974, Christine stated to a Christian fellowship group to which they both belonged that his relationship with the leader of the group, Marie Robinson, was carnal in nature. Michael admitted that he felt evil within him and eventually attacked Marie verbally, who screamed back at him. Marie stated that his eyes changed to something bestial and that he began to speak in tongues. Michael had no memory of the event, something all too common in cases of possession. During the next meeting, he received an absolution, but his behavior continued to become more erratic. As a result, the local vicar called in other ministers experienced in deliverance in preparation to cast out the demons residing within the man. The exorcism, which occurred between the 5th and the 6th of October 1974 at St. Thomas's Church in Gobber, was led by Father Peter Vincent, the Anglican priest of St. Thomas's, and was aided by a Methodist clergyman, the Reverend Raymond Smith. Over the next 8 hours, Michael would repeatedly have crucifixes stuffed inside of his mouth while being doused with holy water. Okay, now my jaw hurts. According to Bill Ellis, an authority on folklore and the occult in contemporary culture, the exorcists believed that they had, in this all-night ceremony, invoked and cast out at least 40 demons, including those of incest, bestiality, blasphemy, and lewdness. In the end, exhausted, they allowed Taylor to go home, although they felt that at least 3 demons were still left in him. While at home, he brutally ended his wife, Christine, by attacking her with his bare hands, tearing her eyes and tongue out, and almost tearing her face off. He was eventually found by a policeman, completely naked in the street and covered in red fluid. At his trial in March, he was acquitted on the grounds of insanity. He was sent to Broadmoor Hospital for 2 years, then spent another 2 years in a secure ward in Bradford before being released. I'm seeing some repeating factors here, are you? Finally, in first place, we have Arne Cheyenne Johnson, otherwise known as The Devil Made Me Do It. Now, before I talk about his exact crime, we have to explain how he came to be possessed. Satan originally possessed David Glatzel, the 11-year-old brother of his fiancée, who was living with the couple. Strange happenings first began in the summer, when young David would jolt awake in the middle of the night, sobbing in fear after being visited by a hideous creature that he described as a man with big black eyes, a thin face with animal features, jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hooves. The beastly apparition had issued a warning. Beware. Very quickly, the visions amplified, with David's beast now haunting him during the daytime. Each time the child experienced a visitation, deep scratches would appear on the front door of the family's home, and red marks would appear on David's body. Thankfully, everyone in the household believed his claims. According to his sister Debbie, it was out of character for him to lie, describing that he never liked anything spooky, not even scary comic books. Becoming increasingly worried for young David, a priest was summoned to bless the house, but that accomplished a big fat nada. The possession had escalated to such heights that the family were now taking shifts to monitor him during the night. Eventually, the involvement of paranormal investigators, some of my favorite people to discuss on this channel, Ed and Lorraine Warren, was begged for, and luckily for the family, they were available. With her strong powers of clairvoyance, Lorraine described encountering a black misty form during her first meeting with David, knowing immediately she and Ed were dealing with something of a negative nature. Lorraine has stated over the course of several visits, David made numerous references to ending in stabbings. In an attempt to save David from his endless tormentors, Arne taunted the demons during exorcisms to enter his body and leave the boy alone. And sadly, the challenge was accepted. Look, I'm all for saving kiddos, but there's a limit. You don't want to actually invite the demons into your body. Over many months after that fateful day, Arne's fiancée reported that he would go into a trance, where he would growl and say he saw the beast, and later would have no memory of it. It was 6 months later, on the 16th of February, 1981, shortly after 6 p.m., that Arn brutally attacked his landlord, stabbing him in a frenzy as he growled like a beast, while Debbie watched, unable to react. The landlord passed away later that evening. At his trial, Arn pleaded not guilty to the ending charge, with his defense being the demonic entity which inhibited his body had caused him to do it.
Number 5. Frank Matthews. Our first spot is notorious criminal kingpin Frank Matthews, a legendary crime lord operating out of New York in the 1960s, who also had some pretty cool classic mafia names like Pee-wee and Black Caesar. Built himself a criminal empire that Los Polos Hermanos would have been jealous of. Starting out small, working in racketeering and illegal gambling ops in Philly in the 1960s, he had his sights set on much bigger things, working his way up, collecting numbers, making contacts, until he could start selling product for some serious money. By the early 1970s, he was already trading millions of dollars for illegal narcotics, importing his stuff from Latin America and distributing it throughout the states. Pee-wee had his hands and pockets across the country, with his criminal web spanning across 21 states at its peak. Naturally, if you're moving that much stuff around the country, with that many people involved in your operation, eventually somebody's gonna get wise. And that's exactly what happened. Boys in Blue tapped Frankie's phone communications and put out a federal bulletin for his arrest. By December 1972, Frank and his girlfriend were arrested at McCarran International in Vegas. Okay, so he got caught. This kind of breaks the list a little bit, but hear me out a little bit here. Because after spending a paltry couple months in jail, Frankie made bail and quickly got out of Dodge to literally never be seen again. Now, there is some discrepancy as to what happened. The FBI suspects that he was taken care of by a major New York crime family for fears he may turn witness. But they did also post a bounty, a $200,000 bounty for finding him, so they suspected he might still be out there. No trace of him was ever found, no body ever discovered, and his story went cold. Is he sleeping with the fishes, or did he return to pull strings from the shadows? Or maybe he pulled a Saul Goodman and started managing a Cinnabon in Omaha, living life on the lam. Man, that's 2 Breaking Bad references in one point. I gotta spread them out a little bit more. We got lots more than awkwardly wedging in Breaking Bad references on Top 5 Scary. We've got the best horror content on the web at least twice a day, every day, so hit subscribe and stay spooked. Number 4, the Pickler. You know, at first glance, this is not a particularly threatening nickname. It kind of sounds like the absolute lamest Z-tier excuse for a Batman villain that you'd throw in as a warm-up before, fighting the actual cool villain of that issue. Well, names can often be so deceiving because there really is not a lot that's funny about the Pickler once you understand why they called him that. He's maybe one of the most bizarre and macabre criminals I've ever read about. The Hungarian Bela Kiss lived in a small village near Budapest in the early 20th century. He lived with an elderly maid, but otherwise kept to himself, didn't have a tight circle of friends, but he did enjoy frequent female company. I mean, of course, with a name like Bela Kiss, makes sense. I gotta stop trying to make this guy sound cute, because I'm gonna regret it in like 1 second. In 1914, during the height of the First World War, Bela left to fight with his country. Now, wartime sometimes necessitates borrowing resources wherever you can, and the Hungarian army was short on gas. On Bela's isolated property were dozens upon dozens of oil barrels all conspicuously laid out in his yard. Someone alerted the soldiers and they went to go borrow a cup or two, and were shocked to discover that upon cracking open the barrels were the bodies of several women floating in alcohol in a depraved attempt to preserve the corpses. Hence where the foul nickname the Pickler came from. See, it's not nearly as funny once you know why they call him that. 20 barrels, 20 missing women. That's somehow not even the scariest, craziest part of this whole story. The women had punctures in their necks and were drained of blood, which sounds completely made up that this guy might also have been a vampire. Now, the Hungarian army moved to seize Bela immediately, but tracking him proved rather difficult, as he had a fairly common name and was also, he was in a war. Somehow, Bela was alerted that police had discovered his operation, and he left a corpse posing as himself in a military hospital and fled, never to be found again. Reported sightings popped up for a few years here and there. Allegedly, he moved to New York to begin a new life, but Bela eluded capture for the rest of his life. Unless he really was a vampire and is still out there, but I don't even want to entertain that possibility. Number 3, Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper is one of history's most infamous criminals, and honestly, maybe the most. Over 130 years ago, and we are still absolutely fascinated by his crimes, and we still don't even know for certain who he was. Could still be out there, he could still be at large. He terrorized Whitechapel through the year of 1888, leaving behind a series of sickeningly grisly crime scenes, torn apart and left in the street for all to see. There are at least 5 confirmed cases that are attributed to Jack the Ripper, but there are several more that are speculated to be attached to him, with some suggesting that it could be anywhere from 13 or higher. Jack eluded capture, stupefied his pursuers and taunted his would-be captors, sending the police souvenirs, I guess, from his crimes, wrapping in the mail and sending them out. On one occasion, he did this alongside a threatening letter, boldly claiming to be from hell. Known as the From Hell letter, the jeering letter taunted the police, inviting them to catch him, while he described the pleasure he took in his sick, sordid dealings. Investigators were downright stumped trying to find the guy. They suspected he didn't have any level of medical training, as his hurried slashes led them to believe he could have been a butcher. The way he slashed his victims was beyond horrific. He left them missing and in some cases beyond recognition. It seemed too like he could be in multiple places at once. A body discovered in New York a few years after the crime spree matched the victims of Whitechapel almost perfectly. Was it a human performing all these sickening acts? Or could the Ripper's mangling be attributed to a demon that was preying on the women of White Castle? It would explain how he was so elusive and managed to evade capture for all those years. Number 2. Emperor Nero. Now perhaps you've heard of Emperor Nero. You've probably heard the story of him playing the fiddle as Rome burned around him. But honestly, historically, that barely even cracks the top 5 craziest things Nero ever accomplished in his tenure as emperor. Nero set a new standard for wildness as a world leader that I think has never been matched again. Where do I begin with him? Let's start off small. He had a dedicated legion of soldiers, referred to as the Augustans, whose sole function was to follow him around and clap and hype him up whenever he would perform. Now that's kind of harmlessly crazy. So what about the story that Nero used to use his enemies as torches for his gardens? Yeah, Nero had a passionate hatred for Christians, blaming them for the infamous fire that engulfed Rome, which some historians believe Nero himself started. That's pretty wild. But what about the fact that Nero would dress himself in the skins of animals with his romantic partners? Or about how he orchestrated the deaths of his mother and brother? Nero ensured his own position as emperor of Rome. Emperor Claudius married Nero's mother Agrippina, who then adopted Nero as his own son. When Agrippina poisoned Claudius, Nero took the throne, and then to ensure that he could keep that position on that lofty chair, he poisoned his stepbrother and would later poison his own mother to make sure no one could challenge him as emperor. He then enjoyed all the pleasures of Rome as much as he could. He depleted the treasury of Rome at one point solely to make a statue of himself in his own honor, the Colossus of Nero, to leave a lasting legacy. In the end, after years of insanity, Nero took his own life by ordering one of his own servants to stab him after being told he would be executed by the state as he was considered an enemy of Rome. He bemoaned what an artist the world was losing. Nero's proclivity for wild debauchery, outrageous pursuits of pleasure, intense wanton cruelty, and violence towards Christians led some people at the time to view Nero as the Antichrist himself. And to be honest, I get it. Number 1. Manson. Charles Manson. The most infamous cult leader in history. And he might very well be one of the most famous criminals of all time. Charles Manson had a hypnotic level of control over his devout followers, leading them to a dark crime spree that would claim the lives of 35 people. Now Manson himself never raised a blade to anyone that we know of, but rather used his domineering charisma to orchestrate the slayings down to the littlest details. He had a grim vision of an apocalypse where he believed there was going to be a race war and that his family needed to prepare for this. And part of these preparations was bumping off key celebrities he had a list of. Manson had dominion over his followers, giving them sacrament every day when in reality he was just giving them illegal substances to keep them impressionable. He banned glasses, calendars, watches, clocks, and anything that would ground them to the real world and made them more malleable to his will. Now, Manson and his family are host to a number of conspiracy theories. There's a very popular one saying that Manson himself is a product of the CIA's MK Ultra brainwashing program, and this is why he was so effective at controlling other people, and that the whole Manson family cult was a CIA op to destabilize the hippie movement. But another very prevailing theory is that the Manson family were Satanists, and they were part of a nationwide cabal connected with other dark crimes around the same time, like the Son of Sam. Manson's obsession with evil, his dark dealings, and complete control over his subjects do make him seem a bit like a modern-day Lucifer. Could Manson have had a supernatural level of control over people?